You were telling me earlier about this sort of backup generator we all have hidden deep inside our muscle fibers.
I mean, imagine a biological mechanism that can instantly regenerate your cellular energy in the exact fraction of a second you were about to reach total physical failure. It's basically an emergency power system that kicks in right when your primary energy reserves are entirely depleted.
That honestly sounds like a piece of speculative science fiction, but it is exactly the kind of biological mystery we love to figure out. Welcome to TalkKast. The substance we are exploring today is creatine, and it sits at the center of a very strange cultural tug of war.
It absolutely does sit right in the middle of that extreme polarization. When you look at the fitness landscape, social media influencers market it as a miraculous, superhuman shortcut to building massive strength. On the other side, skeptics treat it like an illegal steroid or warn that it will slowly destroy your internal organs.
We are going to cut through all of that noise today. I want to understand exactly what this compound is doing on a microscopic level, who actually benefits from it, and why the medical community has spent decades studying it so intensely.
To grasp the reality of what it does, we have to look closely at the basic biological machinery of human energy. People often assume this is a synthetic chemical cooked up in a laboratory for bodybuilders, but the truth is much more elegant. It is a completely natural compound that your own body manufactures every single day.
That immediately changes the context of how we should view it. If our bodies are manufacturing it naturally, it must serve a fundamental physiological purpose.
It is entirely essential for human function. Your liver, kidneys, and pancreas basically act as an internal manufacturing pipeline. They take 3 basic amino acids, which are arginine, glycine, and methionine, and they synthesize them directly into creatine.
So they are building it from scratch and then sending it out into the body to be used.
Exactly. And once your liver completes this manufacturing process, it releases the compound into your bloodstream. The vast majority of it, around 95%, is transported directly into your skeletal muscles. The remaining fraction is taken up by your brain and other highly active tissues.
I'm curious about the dietary angle here. If our organs are synthesizing this from basic amino acids, we must also be absorbing the finished compound directly from our food.
We do absorb a significant amount through our diet, provided we consume animal proteins. Red meat and fish are incredibly rich natural sources of it. Historically, our hunter-gatherer ancestors likely consumed a substantial amount of this compound when they managed to secure large game.
That dietary reality creates a very interesting baseline variable in modern human biology, especially when you consider different eating habits.
You are referring to the difference between individuals who eat meat and those who follow strict plant-based diets. Plant-based foods do not contain meaningful amounts of this specific compound at all.
So vegetarians and vegans must be operating with a significantly lower internal supply.
Precisely. Individuals who follow vegetarian or vegan diets naturally maintain a lower baseline level of stored creatine in their muscle tissue. Their internal organs are still successfully manufacturing enough to keep their basic physiological functions running, but their muscular storage tanks are rarely operating at maximum capacity.
This concept of storage tanks brings us directly to how our muscles actually spend energy. I want to break down the exact mechanism of what happens when someone sprints or lifts something incredibly heavy.
We have to look at the universal currency of cellular energy, which is a molecule called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. Every single movement you make is fueled by ATP.
I have always pictured ATP as the high-octane fuel for the cellular engine.
That is a highly accurate visualization. Whether you are typing on a keyboard or deadlifting 400 pounds, your muscle fibers are burning this specific molecule to create the mechanical force of a contraction. The energy is stored within the chemical bonds holding the 3 phosphate groups together.
When a muscle fiber receives a neurological signal to contract violently, it must demand an enormous amount of energy instantly.
It does, and to get that energy, the cell literally breaks the bond of the 3rd phosphate group on the ATP molecule. This physical break releases the energy required for the muscle to contract. But once that bond is broken and the energy is spent, the molecule has to change its structure.
It essentially becomes a drained battery that can no longer provide immediate power.
It turns into adenosine diphosphate, or ADP. Because it lost one of its phosphate groups, it is now functionally useless for immediate explosive energy. Your cells have a very limited supply of ready-to-use ATP.
I imagine during an all-out maximum effort sprint, your muscle fibers will completely burn through those localized ATP stores very quickly.
You burn through it in roughly 2 to 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a remarkably short window for peak output, so the body obviously needs a way to recycle that depleted ADP back into usable fuel immediately.
Under normal circumstances, like going for a light jog or walking up a flight of stairs, how does the body handle that recycling process?
Your body has plenty of time to utilize oxygen and glucose to slowly recharge that ADP back into ATP. That is your aerobic energy system at work. But during a frantic, explosive sprint, your muscles are burning fuel much faster than the aerobic system can possibly replenish it.
And this is the exact millisecond your internal backup generator comes online.
This is where the stored creatine we mentioned earlier finally enters the equation. Inside your muscle fibers, the creatine is stored in a modified form called phosphocreatine. It literally holds an extra phosphate group ready to go.
So when your localized ATP is drained and your muscle is drowning in depleted ADP, it steps in to fix the problem.
Exactly. An enzyme called creatine kinase springs into action, strips the extra phosphate off the phosphocreatine, and forcefully attaches it to the drained ADP. It is immediately recycling the spent battery so the muscle can fire again.
That has to be the fastest energy-producing pathway in the entire human body.
It really is. This transaction happens almost instantaneously, without relying on oxygen or complex metabolic pathways. It provides a massive, rapid jolt of functional ATP to the muscle fiber.
But this emergency power system must be limited by how much phosphocreatine you actually have stored in the cell.
That is the limiting factor. Even with this backup generator, you only get about 8 to 10 seconds of absolute maximum physical output before the system is completely tapped out.
If the system is naturally designed to last for 10 seconds, I have to question the logic of adding external supplements into the mix. If we eat a standard diet and our organs function properly, trying to artificially force more of this compound into the tissue seems sort of redundant.
The logic of supplementation becomes clear when we distinguish between having enough fuel to survive and having a cellular environment optimized for absolute peak athletic performance. Your natural diet and internal synthesis provide enough to keep your baseline health secure, for sure.
However, a standard omnivorous diet probably rarely saturates the muscle cells to 100% of their physical storage capacity.
It almost never does. To consume the 5 grams of creatine necessary to achieve and maintain total cellular saturation, you would need to eat approximately 2.5 pounds of raw beef every single day.
I suppose the digestive burden, caloric load, and financial cost of doing that would be completely absurd.
It's entirely impractical. A concentrated supplement allows an individual to bypass the digestive logistics of eating mountains of steak and directly pressurize those cellular energy tanks to their absolute limit. That maximum saturation is the entire goal.
When those microscopic energy tanks are completely full, the internal backup generator can run for just a fraction of a second longer before failing.
And in the real world, that tiny biological extension is what allows a weightlifter to squeeze out one final grueling repetition when their muscles are screaming to shut down.
Knowing that this mechanism is exclusively designed for the first 10 seconds of violent, explosive effort gives us a very clear picture of who is actually going to benefit from this.
The physiological reality creates a sharp division in the athletic world. The individuals who extract the most profound benefits are those who constantly push their fast-twitch muscle fibers to the absolute limit.
We are talking about powerlifters, Olympic weightlifters, track sprinters, and athletes in field sports.
Exactly. Athletes in sports like soccer, football, or basketball. A soccer player needs to instantly accelerate to top speed to intercept a pass, and that violent burst of speed relies heavily on the immediate regeneration of ATP.
Their sport is entirely composed of short, intense bursts separated by periods of lower intensity jogging.
Every time they sprint for the ball, they are deeply tapping into that phosphocreatine reservoir. For these athletes, possessing fully saturated energy tanks provides a direct, measurable advantage on the field. They can sprint slightly faster and recover slightly quicker between bursts.
I want to bridge the gap between microscopic cellular energy and visible macroscopic changes. I understand how an extra fraction of a second of energy helps a sprinter, but how does that tiny boost actually translate into building highly visible muscle mass?
It comes down to the compounding mathematics of mechanical tension and physical volume. Let us imagine a dedicated weightlifter performing a heavy set of squats. Without utilizing the supplement, their natural energy stores deplete, and their legs reach total muscular failure at the 8th repetition.
They physically cannot move the weight for a 9th time because the local ATP is completely exhausted.
Exactly. Now, let us imagine that same lifter with their cellular phosphocreatine stores fully topped off. The internal backup generator provides just enough immediate ATP to push through the failure point and grind out a highly difficult ninth repetition.
In isolation, one single extra repetition is not going to suddenly pack an inch of muscle onto someone's legs.
A single repetition changes nothing at all. But we have to look at the compounding effect over an extended training block. If that athlete achieves one extra repetition on every single set across 5 different exercises and repeats that enhanced performance 4 days a week for an entire year, the total volume of weight moved increases drastically.
They have essentially tricked their body into performing a significantly higher workload without extending the actual time spent in the gym.
That enhanced workload creates a much deeper degree of mechanical tension and metabolic stress on the muscle fibers. The body responds to this heightened stress by accelerating muscle protein synthesis.
So over months of consistent training, that tiny microscopic energy advantage cascades into profound structural changes.
It absolutely does, resulting in genuinely measurable increases in both maximum strength and physical muscle hypertrophy.
Let us apply this biological reality to the opposite end of the fitness spectrum. I want to consider someone whose primary form of exercise is jogging 5 miles through their neighborhood or, participating in an hour-long yoga flow class.
For an individual engaged exclusively in steady-state cardiovascular exercise or flexibility training, pursuing this specific cellular saturation is an exercise in futility. This is where the aggressive marketing campaigns of the supplement industry completely detach from biological science.
The marketing often portrays it as a generalized energy tonic that makes everything you do physically easier.
That is a fundamental misrepresentation of human energy pathways. The compound is incredibly specialized. When you are jogging at a moderate pace, your energy demands are steady and manageable.
Your muscle cells have ample time to utilize oxygen to process glucose and fatty acids.
Right, they're slowly and steadily recharging ADP back into ATP through the aerobic energy system. Because the energy drain is slow, the cell never panics.
It never reaches the point of total depletion that triggers the emergency backup generator.
The phosphocreatine reservoir sits practically untouched during a 5-mile jog. Therefore, attempting to utilize this supplement to improve long-distance running times, boost generalized daily energy levels in the office, or directly trigger immediate weight loss is biologically illogical.
It is the equivalent of installing a massive turbocharger in a vehicle that never drives over 30 miles an hour.
That is a perfect way to look at it. We should also look beyond professional athletes and dedicated bodybuilders. The application of this compound in aging populations is one of the most exciting areas of current clinical research.
As humans age, we naturally undergo a debilitating process of progressive muscle loss and strength decline.
Yes, which is clinically known as sarcopenia. Sarcopenia essentially strips away an individual's physical independence, making basic tasks like standing up from a chair or carrying groceries incredibly difficult.
The loss of independence is a massive crisis in geriatric medicine, and it seems like this biological tool could offer some targeted relief.
What makes sarcopenia so insidious is that it primarily targets and atrophies the fast-twitch muscle fibers. Those are the exact same fibers that rely most heavily on phosphocreatine for explosive energy. The slow-twitch fibers used for endurance are relatively preserved.
That structural change explains why falls are so dangerous for the elderly. They simply lack the explosive muscle response required to catch their balance when they trip.
Precisely. When older adults engage in structured resistance training, they can combat this decline. But research indicates that when they combine that resistance training with cellular saturation of this specific compound, the results are remarkably amplified.
They must experience superior retention of lean muscle mass and greater improvements in absolute strength.
They absolutely do, and most importantly, they see a significant enhancement in their physical resilience and ability to navigate daily life independently.
Let us revisit the demographic we touched on earlier regarding natural dietary intake. I assume vegetarians and vegans experience a fundamentally different response to saturation than regular meat eaters.
They exhibit what researchers classify as a massive responder effect. Because their dietary intake of the compound is virtually zero, their initial baseline of muscular saturation is remarkably low. Their tanks are sitting much closer to empty compared to a meat eater.
When they finally introduce the supplement, the contrast between their depleted baseline and maximum saturation must be highly noticeable.
The physiological contrast is stark. A heavy meat eater might only increase their total cellular storage by 10 to 15% on supplementation, resulting in a mild but effective performance boost. A strict vegan, however, might experience an increase in cellular storage of up to 40%.
They frequently report a dramatic, rapid spike in their power output and overall training capacity simply because they are filling a reservoir that has been perpetually low for years.
It is a night and day difference for them. But whenever a substance demonstrates such powerful, proven benefits across multiple demographics, skepticism naturally follows.
People immediately assume there has to be a hidden cost, and the internet has generated an incredible amount of fear regarding the safety of this compound.
The spread of terrifying misinformation regarding this topic is a fascinating case study in how misunderstood medical science mutates into accepted locker room facts. The most pervasive and stubborn myth is the absolute conviction that utilizing this compound will inevitably destroy your kidneys over time.
I have heard that specific warning in gym environments for years. It is often delivered as undeniable medical gospel by veteran lifters.
We can trace the exact origin of this medical misunderstanding, and it revolves around a harmless metabolic byproduct called creatinine. When your muscles utilize the stored phosphocreatine for explosive energy, the chemical reaction naturally degrades a small percentage of the compound into a waste product known as creatinine.
Your body filters this waste product through the kidneys and excretes it safely in your urine, which seems like a standard biological disposal process.
It is entirely standard. The panic stems from how doctors historically evaluate kidney health. Medical professionals measure the levels of creatinine in your blood to estimate your glomerular filtration rate, which is a metric of how efficiently your kidneys are clearing waste.
In a normal patient, if creatinine levels suddenly spike, it strongly suggests the kidneys are failing to filter the blood properly.
Exactly, so you can see the collision of logic here. If you supplement to maximize your muscle stores, you are going to naturally produce a higher volume of that waste product during your workouts.
An athlete taking the supplement will routinely show elevated creatinine levels on a standard blood test simply because they have more muscle energy being burned.
For decades, primary care physicians who were not deeply educated in sports nutrition would see those elevated blood markers, panic, and immediately diagnose the athlete with acute kidney distress. They assumed the kidneys were failing, when in reality the kidneys were functioning perfectly.
It was essentially a false positive that terrified both the patients and the medical community.
It was a massive diagnostic misunderstanding. Modern sports science has thoroughly dismantled this myth. We possess over 100 peer-reviewed studies examining healthy adults utilizing the compound over extended periods, some lasting for several years.
The scientific consensus seems absolute, that in healthy individuals, achieving cellular saturation does not cause any functional damage to the kidneys, liver, or any other internal organ system.
That is a critical distinction. It's perfectly safe for a healthy system, but I imagine it requires medical supervision for someone with pre-existing renal issues. If an individual has a diagnosed pre-existing kidney disease where their filtration rate is genuinely compromised, adding any extra metabolic clearance burden is unwise.
They should absolutely consult a nephrologist before changing their diet or supplement routine.
The terrifying horror stories circulated online almost universally involve extreme abuse, such as consuming 50 grams a day for months, or combining the supplement with dangerous practices like severe dehydration protocols used by fighters trying to make weight.
The mention of dehydration leads directly into the second major fear surrounding this topic. There's a widespread belief that the compound heavily dehydrates the body, leading to severe muscular cramping and heat exhaustion.
This specific fear is rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of cellular hydration dynamics. The compound is known as an osmolyte, which means it actively draws water along with it wherever it travels.
Because the vast majority of the compound is stored deep inside the muscle fibers, it pulls additional fluid directly into the interior of the muscle cells.
This is a completely different mechanism than the kind of fluid retention caused by eating heavily salted foods. Sodium-induced water retention often causes extracellular fluid buildup, which pools water under the skin and leads to a soft, bloated appearance.
This compound causes intracellular hydration, essentially plumping up a grape from the inside, making it firmer and denser.
That is a brilliant analogy. The muscle tissue becomes fuller, firmer, and more structurally sound. However, because this intracellular fluid adds physical weight to the body, an individual might see the scale jump by 2 or 3 pounds in the first week of use.
They panic, look at the scale, and incorrectly assume they are experiencing unhealthy bloating.
The assumption is that if the muscle cells are aggressively pulling in all this water, they must be stealing it from the rest of the body, leaving the systemic environment severely dehydrated.
That is the exact logical leap that created the cramping myth in the first place.
It seems intuitive, but the clinical data proves the exact opposite. Because the total volume of water within the body increases, the individual is actually better protected against severe dehydration.
Extensive studies conducted on collegiate football players completing rigorous training camps in extreme summer heat demonstrated some surprising results regarding this.
The athletes utilizing the compound actually experience a lower incidence of severe muscle cramping and heat exhaustion compared to the athletes given a placebo. The extra intracellular water acts as a thermal buffer, aiding in temperature regulation.
That entirely flips the narrative. It is not causing the cramping. It is actively providing a buffer against the physiological stress of heat.
I want to aggressively press on the most emotionally charged rumor attached to this topic, though. The fear of kidney damage is significant, but the widespread belief that utilizing this compound will inevitably lead to male pattern baldness has practically shaped the modern supplement industry.
The history behind the hair loss rumor is one of the most astonishing examples of an entire global industry panicking over a single, deeply flawed data point.
We can trace the origin of this massive cultural fear back to one tiny study published in 2009. A group of researchers observed 20 college-age rugby players who consumed the compound for a period of only 3 weeks.
It is incredible that a single 3-week study involving only 20 athletes could generate such a deeply entrenched locker room narrative.
At the end of this incredibly brief window, the researchers noted a statistically significant spike in the players' blood levels of DHT.
We need to define exactly what DHT is and why that specific hormone triggered such a massive panic among young men.
DHT stands for dihydrotestosterone. It is an androgenic hormone that is a highly potent derivative of standard testosterone. An enzyme in the body called 5-alpha reductase converts a small portion of circulating testosterone directly into DHT.
From a biological perspective, DHT is intimately linked to the progression of male pattern baldness, medically known as androgenetic alopecia.
In men who are genetically susceptible, DHT binds to receptors in the hair follicles on the scalp, causing those follicles to shrink, weaken, and eventually stop producing hair entirely.
The narrative basically wrote itself. The study showed a spike in a hormone directly responsible for shrinking hair follicles, and the internet immediately concluded that the supplement makes your hair fall out.
The internet seized the abstract of the study without analyzing the methodology. The narrative was permanently cemented into gym culture within months. Entire companies launched product lines of DHT-blocking shampoos and highly marketed creatine-free pre-workout formulas.
Looking back at the methodology you described, 20 rugby players undergoing intense athletic training hardly seems like a stable foundation for a definitive biological law.
It was a remarkably weak foundation. The sample size was mathematically insignificant. Furthermore, the baseline hormone levels of competitive collegiate athletes engaging in violent, heavy resistance training are naturally going to fluctuate wildly due to the physical stress of the sport itself.
If the biological mechanism was genuine, other scientists should have been able to easily replicate the exact same hormonal spike in different groups of athletes.
The absolute most critical failure of the situation was that this specific finding regarding the dramatic DHT spike was never successfully replicated. For over a decade, subsequent research consistently failed to reproduce that initial finding.
To find the definitive scientific reality that finally puts this myth to rest, we have to examine a highly rigorous, randomized controlled trial conducted across 2024 and 2025.
This modern study was specifically engineered to directly answer the question of whether the compound causes hair loss in healthy men. The researchers fundamentally improved every aspect of the methodology.
What made the methodology of this newer study so much more reliable than the 2009 observation?
They utilized a much larger sample size of healthy men. The trial lasted for a full 12 weeks, which is a sufficient duration to track actual physiological changes rather than temporary hormonal blips.
Most importantly, they did not just rely on blood tests to guess at the outcome.
They utilized highly advanced digital imaging equipment to directly physically measure the participants' scalp hair density, thickness, and daily hair shedding rates.
Measuring the actual hair on the scalp is vastly superior. What did this rigorous examination ultimately reveal?
The results were highly definitive and directly contradict the entrenched internet rumors. At the conclusion of the 12 weeks, the men who achieved full cellular saturation showed absolutely no significant change in their blood DHT levels.
They also showed no alteration in their DHT to testosterone ratio when compared against the group taking an inactive placebo.
The hormonal spike from the original 2009 study completely failed to materialize under strict observation. But the most crucial data point came from the scalp imaging.
The researchers found zero difference in hair density, hair thickness, or shedding rates between the group consuming the compound and the placebo group.
Translated into plain language, the highest quality clinical data we currently possess provides zero evidence supporting the idea that normal cellular saturation causes hair loss in healthy men.
The reality of male pattern baldness is far more reliant on deep genetic programming than on the presence of a natural cellular energy enhancer.
Genetics dictate the entire process. Male pattern baldness is overwhelmingly driven by your familial predispositions and how inherently sensitive your individual scalp follicles are to circulating androgens.
The modern data strongly confirms that the human brain is a terrifyingly efficient energy furnace. Despite only accounting for roughly 2% of our total body weight, it aggressively consumes up to 20% of our total daily energy expenditure.
The critical biological connection here is that the billions of neurons firing inside your skull operate on the exact same universal cellular currency as your leg muscles. They rely entirely on ATP to fire electrical action potentials and maintain basic cognitive function.
Since the underlying biology is identical, it stands to reason that maximizing those exact same stores in the brain could potentially enhance raw cognitive power.
That was the exact hypothesis that sparked a massive wave of neurobiological research. Scientists wanted to know if we could functionally upgrade the brain's internal backup generator, which led to the emergence of the nootropic industry.
The marketing rhetoric surrounding nootropics often sounds like the premise of a science fiction movie. They promise a simple daily powder that will instantly transform an average person into a highly focused, hyper-intelligent machine.
I have to aggressively pump the brakes on that specific, limitless narrative. The nootropic marketing machine has heavily distorted and exaggerated the actual scientific data regarding cognitive enhancement.
When we carefully review the neurobiological research, the results must be incredibly nuanced and highly dependent on the baseline functional state of the individual.
That is the defining factor. If you are a healthy, well-rested young adult consuming a nutrient-dense diet and getting 8 hours of sleep, pumping extra levels of this compound into your system is likely going to yield absolutely zero noticeable difference in your memory recall or daily focus.
A healthy, well-rested brain is already operating at peak metabolic efficiency. It simply does not need an emergency backup generator to handle sending emails or studying for a standard exam.
Its natural ATP regeneration pathways are entirely sufficient for the standard demands of modern life. Furthermore, the brain is protected by the highly selective blood-brain barrier, which actively resists absorbing massive amounts of systemic creatine from the bloodstream.
If the healthy brain strongly resists external supplementation, under what specific conditions do the cognitive benefits actually manifest?
The clinical data reveals noticeable, highly measurable cognitive improvements only when the brain's internal energy systems are severely compromised, depleted, or actively failing to keep up with metabolic demand.
The most obvious and common state of depletion is severe sleep deprivation. When an individual is heavily sleep deprived, their natural ATP regeneration in the brain must be struggling significantly.
The brain is essentially running on fumes. In that specific state of severe physiological stress, the extra energy reserves provided by cellular saturation act as a crucial biological buffer.
Studies examining sleep-deprived subjects required to complete complex executive function tasks demonstrate that the supplemented group experiences a measurable preservation of short-term memory recall.
The supplement prevents the expected cognitive crash. We see similar protective benefits in aging populations facing the natural onset of cognitive decline.
It is less of a magical upgrade for a perfect brain and more of a highly effective biological safety net for a brain that is actively struggling to survive a demanding environment.
That is a perfect summation. There is also fascinating ongoing preliminary research examining its potential use in assisting recovery from mild traumatic brain injuries or concussions, where the brain experiences a massive, immediate energy crisis.
This detailed nuance regarding who actually requires the cognitive and physical enhancements leads us to a highly sensitive demographic, I frequently see high school athletes desperately searching for any legal advantage they can utilize to dominate their sport.
This is a demographic where the entire medical and scientific community strongly urges extreme caution. The overwhelming majority of the thousands of rigorous studies conducted on this compound have exclusively utilized adult subjects.
The pool of quality research examining healthy children, developing adolescents, or high school athletes is remarkably small and highly fragmented. It seems reckless to blindly assume adult data applies equally to a teenager undergoing massive hormonal shifts.
That assumption is a severe error in pediatric medicine. A major systematic review conducted in 2023 specifically investigated youth usage and concluded that the existing studies on adolescents were generally of low methodological quality.
We simply do not possess the necessary decades-long longitudinal data required to definitively state that chronic cellular saturation is unequivocally safe for a human body still actively navigating puberty.
That glaring lack of conclusive long-term safety data should be the ultimate determining factor for any parent, coach, or teenage athlete considering its use.
The responsible ethical medical advice is clear that we must never treat developing children as if they are simply miniature adults who require concentrated nutritional supplements.
The foundation is everything. They need to prioritize consuming a highly varied, nutrient-dense diet, maintaining a scientifically structured training program, and securing 9 hours of high-quality sleep every night.
Introducing highly concentrated, isolated supplements to bypass a lack of discipline in those foundational elements is entirely the wrong approach to athletic development. I have seen a specific counterargument utilized in online debates, though.
Proponents will often point out that the compound is successfully prescribed by pediatricians to treat certain sick children, implying that it must therefore be safe for healthy teenagers.
That is a classic example of misplaced medical extrapolation, and it completely misrepresents the underlying science.
There are incredibly rare, devastating genetic conditions known as creatine deficiency syndromes. In these tragic cases, a child's body is genetically mutated and entirely incapable of producing or transporting the compound properly.
Those children are suffering from a pathological starvation of cellular energy that stunts their entire physical and cognitive development.
For those specific patients, administering massive doses of the supplement under strict medical supervision is literally life-saving. However, attempting to use a desperate medical treatment for a severe genetic defect as justification for a healthy high school quarterback to take a supplement is a massive, illogical leap.
Unless an adolescent is diagnosed with one of these rare genetic disorders by a specialist, they should absolutely not be utilizing the compound. Now, for the healthy adult listener who has absorbed all this context and decided to purchase the product, the supplement aisle is an overwhelmingly confusing landscape.
The supplement industry thrives on creating artificial complexity to justify absurd profit margins. Consumers will be aggressively bombarded with flashy labels promoting supposedly superior, cutting-edge chemical structures.
They will encounter heavily marketed variations like creatine citrate, ethyl ester, malate, and even high-sugar gummy variations. The marketing materials always guarantee superior absorption rates into the muscle.
The absolute best piece of consumer advice I can offer is to aggressively ignore all of that sophisticated marketing noise. The undisputed, overwhelmingly proven gold standard of this compound is plain, unflavored, ordinary creatine monohydrate.
Why do companies spend millions of dollars formulating and marketing structures like ethyl ester if the basic monohydrate is already the gold standard?
They do it entirely to secure proprietary patents and drive up the retail price. Entities entirely dedicated to monitoring these commercial products have clearly stated that the clinical research supporting these enhanced absorption claims is incredibly weak or non-existent.
The claim of zero water retention always seemed highly suspicious based on what we discussed earlier. If it does not pull water into the cell, it is likely not functioning correctly.
That marketing claim is practically an admission of product failure. The history of the ethyl ester variation is a perfect example, as it was marketed as a highly advanced form that bypassed digestion but actually degraded almost entirely into the useless waste product creatinine before reaching the bloodstream.
Consumers were paying premium prices for a product that was biologically inferior to the cheapest basic version.
In almost every single major scientific trial demonstrating the impressive physical and cognitive benefits we have discussed today, the researchers exclusively utilized standard monohydrate.
It is the undeniable workhorse of the scientific community. It dissolves easily in room temperature water, your intestinal tract absorbs it perfectly, and it remains extremely cost-effective.
Beyond selecting the correct monohydrate structure, consumers must also navigate the very real danger of contaminated supplements. The industry is notoriously underregulated.
Developing label literacy is a consumer's strongest defense against hidden contaminants. You must exclusively look for products that proudly display clear logos indicating rigorous third-party testing.
Organizations like NSF Certified for Sport, Informed Sport, and the USP exist specifically to independently verify that the physical contents of the tub perfectly match the claims printed on the nutritional label.
Those organizations essentially act as an independent auditor to ensure the manufacturing facility is clean and the product is entirely free from banned anabolic substances.
If a supplement brand cannot be bothered to pay for independent third-party verification, they absolutely do not deserve your money or your trust.
Once a high-quality product has been secured, the practical application becomes the final hurdle. Let us establish the exact daily dosage required to achieve and maintain cellular saturation.
The daily maintenance dosage required to keep your muscular energy tanks completely topped off is surprisingly small. The overwhelming scientific consensus advises a steady daily intake of 3 to 5 grams.
For context, that is roughly equivalent to 1 standard level teaspoon of the powder every single day. You frequently hear intense debates regarding a specific protocol known as a loading phase, though.
The standard loading phase protocol dictates consuming 20 grams of the powder, usually divided into 4 separate servings throughout the day for the first 5 to 7 days of use.
I assume the loading phase is simply a brute force biological mechanism designed to force the muscle cells to reach maximum saturation at an accelerated rate.
That is exactly the physiological purpose. It forcefully saturates the tissue in roughly 5 days. However, aggressively forcing that sheer volume of the compound through your digestive system can frequently overwhelm intestinal absorption.
It sounds like an unnecessary stress to place on the digestive system, risking stomach upset just to get a minor head start on the physical benefits.
The scientific consensus entirely agrees that the loading phase is completely optional. If an individual simply starts taking the standard 3 to 5 grams a day from the very beginning, their muscle cells will reach absolute saturation in about 3 to 4 weeks without any digestive agony.
That gentle approach brings us directly to the million-dollar question that has sparked endless debates on gym floors. Should it be violently chugged immediately prior to the workout or mixed into a shake immediately after?
I am going to completely dismantle the timing myth right now because it causes massive, unnecessary stress. The scientific reality is that the specific timing of the dose is vastly less important than simple, unrelenting daily consistency.
It seems highly counterintuitive that the timing does not matter for a supplement designed to enhance immediate physical energy.
People are heavily confusing the immediate jolt of a central nervous system stimulant, like caffeine, with the gradual structural accumulation of this specific compound.
If caffeine is a light switch that instantly blocks adenosine receptors, this compound must operate on a completely different biological timeline.
Swallowing a single dose of monohydrate 30 minutes before your workout does absolutely nothing to instantly inject functional energy into your muscles for that specific session.
The massive benefits you experience during a heavy set of squats are entirely powered by the compound you have been quietly accumulating inside your tissues over the previous 3 weeks.
It operates entirely in the background, independent of your immediate digestion. You must view it practically as a daily health vitamin, rather than a tactical pre-workout booster shot.
The specific hour you consume it truly does not matter as long as you do not skip days.
As one extensive expert review elegantly noted, the biological mechanics simply demand a regular, consistent presence of the compound in the bloodstream to maintain cellular pressure.
As we look back across the entirety of this deep dive into human energy systems, I am struck by a fascinating biological contradiction. We have spent an hour detailing a highly effective substance, yet the underlying reality of how it actually operates is profoundly boring.
The fundamentally boring, predictable nature of the truth is exactly why the industry marketing hype has to be so incredibly loud and aggressive. The compound is a highly reliable, mechanically sound tool designed for a very specific physiological job.
It does exactly what it's designed to do and absolutely nothing more. When an individual fully understands those specific mechanical parameters, it functions as a remarkably safe insurance policy for securing marginal gains.
However, the moment someone attempts to use it as a generalized cure-all meant to passively melt fat or somehow compensate for a terrible diet and poor sleep habits, it completely falls flat.
If there's one compelling thought to extract from the overwhelming noise of the fitness industry, it is the realization that the most profound physiological enhancements do not come from highly marketed synthetic miracles. They come from patiently maxing out the subtle, microscopic machinery your body already built. Thanks for listening to TalkKast.